Joining me today is a very special guest, Katarina Thorsen. She is an accomplished artist, writer, and researcher, an incredible researcher, which you're going to find out. She has shown her artwork in private collections in North America and Europe. As well, she is received many awards, I should say, and she's here today to talk about her first graphic novel, Salt Green Death. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Christine. It's a delight to be here.
Yes, well, behind me, I have the book, Salt Green Death. And I have to ask you, for our viewers and listeners, this was inspired by James Joyce, the quote, if I may say. So, how did that inspire you?
Yeah, so the title, yes, is from a James Joyce quote, and the book itself really centers around, it's a true story centering around a young man who went through the mental health system in the 40s to 60s. However, so I did a lot of research around mental health and then his heritage is Irish, so then I started like looking into Irish authors and I pull inspirations from everywhere. But I found a book by Carol Schloss, and I don't remember her last name, so I'll have to look that up. But her book was about Lucia Joyce, James Joyce's daughter, who had schizophrenia, and it was about his relationship to her. So that's kind of how I started reading Joyce. I had always wanted to read Joyce, and then in that book, because my book, it has a lot of complicated sources. I didn't have a structure, and I came across this quote from Ulysses about James Joyce talking about being intertwined in her story in the seaweed. And it's about being in the ocean and being sort of enveloped by this woman. And then it ended with salt green death. And there was something about reading that quote that emulated what I was going through by being really intertwined in this particular story. But it was salt green death became the structure for the book. It was this eureka moment where I could see the structure of the book through this quote. And then it was perfect that I was reading Joyce and Ulysses as I was finishing the book. And then somehow magically he became intertwined in the story as well. So it's a really interesting thing. But just those three words at the end of that quote immediately gave me the three parts of the book that I needed to shove all this information in, as opposed to a linear timeline story, which I'm not, you can do those, but I really like something more that challenges the reader.
I like the word magical because it happened for a reason. It was timely, right? So
Mm.
gave you to tell the story. You said it's a true story, and tell us what inspires you to write the story. From my understanding, it was about Molly O'Dwyer, right? You were writing about women during the times in the 1940s. The hardship. Can you tell us more?
Yeah, so it's a strange way that I came across it. I had a Bachelor of Science, I'm an artist, I'm a mom, all those things. So it's not like I was set out to, although I've always wanted to create a graphic novel. That's been a dream since I was young. And but in 2003, I'd been studying behavior evidence analysis, which is basically criminal profiling, because I've always been really interested in psychology, psychiatry. There's family history with interacting with the psychiatry system and things like that. The young people I've worked with are very, a lot of them struggle with mental health. So I've always been very interested in those subjects, but also interested in the dark side of human nature. And so I was studying behavior evidence analysis, what makes people tick. And then there was I'll get to the point. It makes sense. I went to a reading at the Vancouver Public Library in 2003. My dad had given me a newspaper article about a new book that was being released called Stanley Park, and by Timothy Taylor. And in there was a thin thread of a famous Vancouver cold case.
Mm.
And this cold case was about two children found in Stanley Park in 1953, and they had been there for years. It was their skeletons. So during the talk, there was a retired homicide detective and a forensic odontologist who studies DNA and teeth talking about this cold case. And they took the opportunity with the release of Timothy Taylor's book to talk about it and connect with community and see if they could find out who these kids were. Because even almost 55 years later, they were still unidentified, right? So it was, this strange, they were really doing the anniversary. I guess it would have been 50 years at that point. And so they thought, okay, if we talk to community, maybe there's community members that remembers kids that went missing. So I was there with my mom, who was alive at the time. And then she said, go up and ask them if they need help researching. I'm like, oh my gosh. So she, literally just pushed me forward. And so luckily, the retired homicide detective was really open to that. Like, because I said, I'm studying this, but I do a creative approach where I draw what I research. And so it was researching that he gave me in access to the BC archives because of his credentials. And so I was allowed to go to the BC archives and other archives to look up community members, missing children, whatever, right? But I needed to show him because we differed on the reason that those kids were killed. And so I found that it was a last option. What was the condition for women? He felt that a mother had done it. That was kind of what the people at the time in the 50s felt. And so I thought, well, we'll have to see what is the condition for women post-war in Vancouver. That was really what I wanted to sort of look at. And it was hard, soldiers were returning, there was poverty, it was extremely difficult, there's PTSD. And so there was on the front cover of the Vancouver Sun in 1947, November 1947, because the original police officers felt they had kind of gone back in time and felt those kids were killed in 1947. So I kind of let's take a look at Vancouver in 1947. And on the cover of the Vancouver Sun was an image of a young woman dying, like she had jumped off the Georgia Viaduct. And we don't see that these days, luckily, on the front cover of things. However, back then they did. And so I was at the Vancouver Public Library. It's close to the Georgia Viaduct. I can't sometimes fantasize. I love thinking about that. Maybe her soul is walking on the viaduct. And I opened that news article and it just felt like something went literally like, hello. It was just this, I became obsessed with her because who is she? Why is that her legacy is just to be on the cover? And so because I had access to archives, I parallel researched her as I was working on Babes in the Woods case and seeing like this intertwining of timelines just as example of people living then. And so that was really great. And so then I asked the manager at the BC Archives, do you have anything about Molly O'Dwyer? Right. And so he came back. He said, I can give you this one page. And it was a page from a patient file from Essendale. It was the provincial mental hospital at Essendale, which then became Riverview, which is now called the Place of the Great Blue Heron. So this was a young man who was hospitalized there. But in this one page that the manager gave me, it just explained Molly O'Dwyer, the sister of Joseph, a little bit about her behavior. It was a family history thing. And from that one page, I could find so much more as I'm still doing my other life. Things are happening in life that are epic and bizarre. And I'm, parents are sick and all these things and kids are growing. But this story just stuck with me. And so for the 1 year I was with that task force that was researching those kids. And I proved to the homicide detective that he was wrong in his lead, that who he felt had done it. And that was the day that I was out, which was an interesting time. It was, fascinating. But at the same time, I still became very interested in this young woman. And I was still really interested in those kids. So I kept researching those stories. I got access to the autopsy report, her autopsy report, and her coroner inquiry. And so that fed more and more. And it wasn't until 2017. So I kept drawing. I kept trying to come up with, is it a book? Is it a manuscript? What is it? Is it a graphic novel? Is it an illustrated book? I just wanted to tell this story. But over the years, it was never ready. It was just, I kept finding out more and more about the family. So it almost felt like the family was like, we're not ready, we're not ready, we're not ready. And then 2017, I got access to the full patient file at the archives, and it was thick, beautifully organized. It was the actual papers, like you could feel the type underneath the paper, and it's an incredible thing that's lying there at the BC archives, are these patient files that they have opened up for people to research their families and things like that. And so I got a chance, and I opened it up, and his face was on the front. I had never seen her brother's face before. I had only had her face on the cover, and it was just this like, my God. And so I got that all, I could take pictures of all of it. They allowed me to photocopy the file, or to take pictures of the file, and then I typed it all out slowly as if I was, over the years. And then it wasn't until COVID hit in 2020 that I decided to redo I had 8 banker boxes worth of research on Molly O'Dwyer and her family, but also about the babes in the woods, those kids in the park. So I decided to separate everything. And so it became very clear to me that this is the families. I need to just focus on the family story. I don't need to do this big thing where they're mishmashed with this other story. And then it became very clear to me that it was Joseph's story because it's his file. And so that then became the focus, and it really was helpful. And then I started to draw it, and it just became, as soon as I knew it was his story, it became clear. And so I gave a test. I did a 12-page broadsheet of newspaper in honor of my dad finding the original article, in honor of newspapers. And that got me into residency. And then I met the publisher. And then it was only within April 2023 to September 2024 that all the drawings were done. It was just, something was just driving it. And then the book is done. It's wild, and it feels very peaceful. The family felt ready, right? There have been times where other people have interviewed me about it, and things would go wrong, technically wrong. Things didn't work out. So, yeah, weird. Yeah. So that was my very long-winded description.
I love
Yeah.
it. No, I love it. Congratulations. And I am so, it feels like you said, feels not, at peace. You feel like relief. They feel like you're sharing his story. Was there anything that surprised you as you were going through the research and drawing, and anything that kind of like, oh, that surprised me?
Yeah, I think not only the contents of a patient file from that time, how incredibly organized it was, not only the details in the family that I could find out, but what really was wonderful to kind of come to terms with, because it could be a cuckoo's nest story, right? He's gone through all the one flew over the cuckoo's nest kind of things, electroshock, coma insulin, lobotomy, like all those things. But what surprised me was that I truly started to see psychiatry history in a different lens. It can be looked at as such an evil lens, the history of psychiatry, but I saw they were doing the best they could at the time, and the treatments that he was going through were the cutting edge treatments at the time, because I was really studying the history of those treatments. So it wasn't like they just willy-nilly did things, the care that they took, and, really recording the stories was what also surprised me, because in my head initially, I thought, here's the forgotten, he died in the hospital eventually and very young, were his parents like neglectful, all those things that go through, but they were very caring. They really are. So those things really surprised me, was actually the care around him, even though he was it was a difficult time, and the best treatment they could do is just to keep people quiet, which is, pretty horrifying. But that was surprised me, was that the treatment was really cutting edge of its time, right? And so, there's still issues today about psychiatric treatment, but again, people are trying to do the best they can, I believe, right? So,
And what has the feedback been like so far?
It's been really great. It's going fast. The official date was May 20th, but it had already been kind of sent out to people. And I've been to two festivals now, comic arts festivals, my first ever, as an artist. And that was in Stockholm and then Toronto. So I was really lucky to come to my first festivals as a guest and to be at the tables. And people are drawn to um, the mentors I had at Banff, who are pretty renowned graphic novelists themselves, are calling it pushing the genre, because graphic novels tend to have grit, or comics tend to have panels and a very particular look to them, panels and stories and superheroes and all those things. There's multiple incredible array of comics and graphic novels. The traditional ones that people think about are, the superhero stuff, but there is a, incredible world out there. But my work has been kind of pushing the way the pages are laid out, I try to stay as true to the story as I possibly can. And so I'm intertwining. So it's been a really positive response. I find both festivals, comic academics were really the ones that were drawn to me, those that are looking at the history of comics. And an older crowd was drawn to me. But in Toronto, there was also the younger crowd that was excited about it. So I was seeing, but it's definitely a more mature story, so it has a different sort of way people are attaching to it, and it's a slow read, but you have to work to read it, and but people are excited, which is really exciting. The most great compliment could be to be pushing the genre of graphic novels.
Yes, and you used colored pencils and graphic, is that correct? Graphite?
Yeah, my medium is drawing on newsprint, so cheap newsprint, like literally packing newsprint. I just love drawing on newsprint. Also, it worked because of the newspaper story and the vintage look that newsprint has once you scan it. But I use a China marker, which is like a grease pencil, and that's how I draw them. It's very, black, and it's very you can't erase it. So I love to just go for it. Also, I don't use digital, so you see the messy lines underneath. You see the paint splatches, and then I will color with colored pastel or watercolor and add a lot of like white highlights. And so those drawings will eventually deteriorate, right? Because they're on newsprint. And I kind of like that thought, right? That eventually these will disappear over time, the originals. But yeah, so they're scanned. The original drawings are scanned. And then I use embroidery in a few of the drawings as well.
You make it sound easy, but it's not.
It's just a really delicious process that I can't help but do. And even when I didn't have a publisher, I was doing, like, I'm always done this, like draw. Like I draw to address my own personal journeys and anxieties and all those things. So that's why I tell the young people I work with, that I have worked with, that stay in creative process, because when the opportunity comes up, say that you get a grant or you get a publishing contract, it's just the second nature to keep drawing, right? Or keep filming or keep doing your photography, so that if you're not practicing that process all the time, no matter what, then it's going to be harder for when the project actually then comes.
Yes, I mean, it's a wonderful medium of the arts and visual storytelling, and your passion started from your dad, right? Your dad is an artist, and tell us about that, like how he inspired you. But can you share, a story about your?
Yeah. So my father, who passed away in 2012, he Norwegian, very Norwegian, and he was raised in Norway and then moved to Sweden when he went to university. But in his younger, he was born to be an artist, right? A cartoonist. His dream was to be a cartoonist. And when he was 12, I think, so this is during the war. He was born in 1930. He wrote to Disneyland Right. He loved the original Disney animations, and he would copy them as much as he could. And so he wrote to Disneyland, and he got a letter back from Mr. Walt Disney, like actually Mr. Walt Disney, with original drawings. And so that was part of his life. He was always drawing. His, money-making thing was being an engineer and designer of sawmills and pulp mills. And so that brought us to Canada. But throughout my life, he was always cartooning and I was always drawing. I got that bug from him. And so then when he later on in his life, he always wanted to get back to that. Life takes over, you're raising a family. He always wanted to get back to cartooning because he would cartoon for sawmill companies and do Christmas cards and things like that. But his dream was to do it full time. And then in 2005, he had a massive stroke. It was a brutal stroke. So he was paralyzed on the left side. His dominant side, though, he was right-handed. And what we're grateful for is that he still had his voice. He still had his passion. He did need to be in care for 7 years. However, once he got out of ICU, I brought a sketchbook and pencils and he started to sketch. And then he, for 7 years, cartooned. And he was in an extended care unit. It was not fancy, but he had his own desk and he drew and we worked together. Like we would share journaling and cartooning throughout that. And so I would, he'd have one journal, I'd have the other, and we'd exchange every time I went over, which was almost every day. And then eventually, his final year, we created a book about it. Through a hybrid publisher. So it was amazing. He never got to see the book, but he got to sign, the manuscript 2 weeks before he passed. So truly incredible, right? And so I think there's something in us that just need to create all the time. Like I'm always creating something. And so he was lucky in that sense that he found joy through drawing and a meaningful life in a very hospital bed kind of setting, right? But with incredible caregivers there, and then that art. He says, "Art saved my life," right? And I've never been happier. So it's pretty incredible.
Mm-hmm. It's like it's art therapy, right?
It is. Yeah.
And and what do you want people to get from your book? Like, the message, the overall message.
I think the main messages are those forgotten stories that we don't know are in there, right? And to be curious about those old stories and how much you can find out about someone from one little news article and digging deeper. So I was adamant about including a bibliography, and so my publisher was also incredibly supportive about that. And luckily, that's been the thing that's gotten a lot of academics really excited because the bibliography is quite long, but it truly is about that insatiable desire to research something, right? It doesn't need to be an old story. It doesn't need to be those things, but there's so much you can find out and be curious about. And and the magic of it's almost like ghosts, right? That are picking you. You never know when a story finds you in that sense, right? So yeah, that's why people to just sort of see how art can tell a story very clinically. If it had just been a manuscript, it would be quite dry, I think. But if me interpreting it as art is my dramatic license to do. So yeah.
And for people to check out your work and to purchase a copy of your book, where can they go?
So I'm at katthorsen.com. So it's Kat is sort of the short name. So KATTHORSEN.com. And then there's a lot of information there. There's videos. There's even the book, the PDF of the book that my dad and I made. And but there's a lot of information there. And then the book can be ordered through the publisher Conundrum Press. And they're out of Nova Scotia. Andy Brown is an independent publisher who is incredibly supportive of his artists, allowing full creative control of your art. And then he gives incredible feedback. So conundrumpress.com conundrumpress.com has the book. And then if you're in Vancouver, I will be at some festivals. So in July of 2025 now, it's the Vancouver Art Book Fair. I'll be there. And then in September, I believe it's somewhere around there, we'll have the Vancouver Comic Arts Festival. So that's for people who are in Vancouver. But yeah, a lot of information can be found on my website.
Thank you. And I'll be there. And thank you. Thank you so much for being a guest today. And I'd like you to come back.
Thank you so much. It was delightful.
Thank you.